Still recovering. So look, I had to skip Sunday's show because I still had like a bunch of chest congestion, but I wanted to talk about a few things that showed up already last week that I didn't really get to talk as much about on Friday. This will probably be a little bit of a shorter episode, but let's start very quickly with the Supreme Court decisions from last Friday. On Friday, the Supreme Court issued several decisions left over on their docket to end their current session before they go on break. There were a bunch of different varying decisions here. For example, one of them upheld a provision of Obamacare. Another let parents with religious exemptions opt out of school readings with LGBTQ plus material. Now, even that is somewhat of a misnomer because the actual case with CASA isn't about the birthright citizenship clause at all. It's actually to do with nationwide injunctions in an effort by the Trump administration to use semantics to push through the executive order they just made. You see, nationwide injunctions from a district level have been controversial for a while now. However, in the modern Trump era, they have been a necessary tool in curbing a pretty lawless president with authoritarian tendencies. I mean, especially when he tries to do things that are blatantly unconstitutional. In fact, during oral arguments, multiple justices pretty much hinted that they felt that the Trump administration's position on birthright citizenship was incorrect, while they were more middling on nationwide injunctions themselves. But nevertheless, the court still sided with the Trump administration in this case in a 6-3 ruling across party lines, stating that the lower courts cannot grant an injunction that goes beyond the scope of bringing relief to the immediate parties in question. So, for example, in this specific case, 22 states sued the Trump administration over birthright citizenship, and the judge granted a nationwide injunction. However, under this new ruling, the judge's injunction only applies to those 22 states. If you're already sensing the issue here, you're not the only one. There is a sincere worry that this could create a patchwork series of laws and pitfalls across the United States, that the administration could impose draconian rules adopted by certain states and rejected by others, creating different sets of rights depending on where you are or where you're born. You get the idea. That is insane. Now, with that being said, there are still some carve-outs in this ruling. For example, while you can't necessarily use the same methods of getting nationwide injunctions as before, you can now use a class action lawsuit. The justices were hinting at that consistently during the oral arguments. In fact, shortly after the ruling was issued, a day later, a class action lawsuit against Trump's executive order gained nationwide class status, and therefore an injunction printed to that lawsuit would work under this provision. But even still, it's an incredibly stupid fucking decision to play the semantic game with the Trump administration when they're clearly acting in bad faith to get across a blatantly unconstitutional order. And for those going like, oh, you're playing dumb, Zed, they clearly wanted this the whole time. Again, even in the oral arguments, the Supreme Court heavily said they disagree with Donald Trump's definition of birthright citizenship itself. They don't think Trump's executive order is constitutional either. But it's this naive, semantic, curmudgeonly fucking rule of procedure they're enforcing that makes it harder to check the administration. Just blatantly stupid fucking, gatekeepy rules. Now, again, that does not mean the Trump administration can't be checked at all by the courts from now on, right? This doesn't remove judges from having any avenue to block blatantly unconstitutional things. You'll likely see judges grant nationwide class certifications on more cases to be able to issue injunctions against some of these horrible orders. And there's also the Administrative Procedure Act mentioned by Kavanaugh in a footnote. And I'll have this TikTok explain it because I actually heard about it on this TikTok.
Another law that gives district courts certain authorities over the executive branch. It is mentioned in a footnote by Amy Coney Barrett and several times by Kavanaugh in his concurring opinion. That law is called the Administrative Procedure Act, or the APA. What the APA does is it outlines judicial review for agency actions. And what the APA says is that when an agency does something, whether it issues a rule or a policy, someone can sue, and a district court judge can, in fact, decide to set aside or not set aside that agency action. And Kavanaugh, in his concurring decision, repeatedly describes a functional equivalent to a nationwide injunction that would be a preliminary setting aside of an agency action under the APA. He essentially says that is still possible as long as it fits the APA requirements.
So yeah, there are still ways to fight this, but a glaring view at how much the system itself needs an overhaul because of how easily bad faith actors can use semantics to play this fucking game. And very quickly, also, I do have to mention this because there's been a lot of fear mongering around this as well, right? If you are a US citizen and an immigrant, right, and you're worried about your citizenship status because of this order, Trump's executive order does not denaturalize or take away anybody's citizenship, okay? The order that will go into effect in 30 days means anyone born after that date to parents that were not citizens will not be granted citizenship. Yes, that's still shitty. Yes, there are still ways to reverse it and undo that damage, but that requires time and more election cycles. Until then, let me know what you think in the comments. All right, moving on, let's talk about Trump's big beautiful bill. Believe it or not, the Trump budget bill, or the big beautiful bill, has been facing a lot of pushback over the last few weeks as it barrels towards its hopeful July 4th signing date. The bill is incredibly unpopular with the American public and, surprisingly, with Republicans in the Senate and Congress who face their own frustrations with both the Medicaid cuts and some of the other expenditures that the bill proposes. Now, there are already a number of Republican holdouts already, like Rand Paul and Tom Tillis, the latter of whom faced a lot of ire from Trump when he broke away from the bill to the point where he got threatened with a primary challenge from Trump on Truth Social and then promptly just decided to retire. But at the same time, part of me wonders if that was even a good decision because, again, this bill is unpopular even with Republicans. You could have wrote it out, Tom. But I'm not complaining. Get the fuck out of there. But even former Trump ally and permanent fraud Elon Musk is calling out the bill and labeling it as insane and destructive. Now, currently the bill faces a vote-o-rama on Monday, and it may have already cleared that by the time you hear this, or may still need to clear that. But even then, that isn't the end of the line, because then it's got to head back to the House, and then it's going to get even more changes. Again, this bill has been a giant clusterfuck since it was introduced, and a lot of people are plugging their noses, having a lot of problems with it, and it keeps getting more problems every time it gets kicked back to a different chamber. Now, one of the biggest aspects of this bill, right, that everybody's been talking about is I don't know the grammar, right? Are the Medicaid cuts, right? A lot of people are very, very worried about these Medicaid cuts. And I will say, at least in the latest round or update on this bill, there was some language that was softened pertaining to those Medicaid cuts. And there were parts of those cuts that were actually rejected by the Senate parliamentarian. But there is still a lot of deeply damaging things done to the Medicaid program in this bill, including an 80-hour per month work requirement. I'm sure that's going to be great for your grandpa with Alzheimer's, these fucking clowns. And look, with this bill, there is an estimated 12 million people that could lose their health insurance coverage by the 2030s. Now, this is a developing story, and there's quite a bit more to talk about in the coming days, but I would say, in terms of signal boosting and fighting against this bill, right, talking about the damage this bill can do has been incredibly useful at pushing back against it. Again, this is an incredibly unpopular bill, right? Now, don't fearmonger. There's a difference, right? There's a lot of people who are mistaking talking about the damage this bill can do with deliberately, like, overhyping and scaring the shit out of people for everything, that they're all going to die tomorrow. That's not the case. There is damage that can happen, but the more pushback that can be raised against the bill, the more hopefully the cuts to vital programs can be reduced, and the more Trump's bullshit can be tempered. Again, this is a marathon of a fight. Don't give up. Let me know what you think in the comments. And that's our show. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry, very, very short episode, I know. I'm still recovering from being sick. We're going to have another episode on Thursday and another episode on Sunday. But anyway, my name is Tabani. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all soon. Let's go!